My name is Maija Boltovski. I am the head of the chair of foreign languages in the Estonian Military Academy, and I also teach English. And today I would like to share the rationale and results of two researches that we conducted in our chair. And we think that these researches might be relevant more widely, not just in language learning. The researches focus on the teacher's understanding and implementation of contemporary learning paradigm. And the second one focuses on teacher-student relationship in the process of teaching and learning regarding the question of values in the classroom. So who actually establishes the values in classroom? Comprehensive understanding of teaching and learning is really a passion of mine that I am lucky enough to share with my good colleague, Aigi Piirimees, who I sincerely hope is here listening. And Aigi played an enormous role in conducting this research. And I hope she will be here helping me answer the questions after the presentation as well. So in Estonia, contemporary learning paradigm, or the modern learning, is no longer something that that we need to adopt or something that we have to get used to. So this has become the new norm for us. The 21st century and the era of globalization has brought about great changes in society, which have in turn set new demands on education, causing changes in teaching and learning. And the role of education is to help people become self-regulating, lifelong learners who are able to search for and find information and who know what to do with this information, who are able to construct new knowledge and thus cope better with rapid change in society and handle the unknown better, the unknown that society offers us or the world offers us on a daily basis, pretty much. Professor Raul Eamets, who is the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences in the University of Tartu and also a member of the working group that was developing the Estonian strategy of lifelong learning, has described the future needs for education as double or triple T, replacing the traditional T model. He claims that the changes in society require for people to acquire and establish a broad foundation of general knowledge on very many topics. And on top of that, acquire in-depth expert knowledge in not just one, but two or three fields of expertise. The vision document, the Smart and Active Estonia 2035, continues the course of the Lifelong Education Strategy 2020, characterizing learning as student-centered and cooperative, aimed at empowering and supporting every individual student, the personal fulfillment, and the ability to cope with different roles. So a meaningful learning, student and teacher autonomy, close cooperation, and systematic feedback are the important key words when describing contemporary learning and teaching. And compared with the former teacher-centered approach, the focus has shifted from learning facts to developing problem-solving skills, doing it creatively and in cooperation with your peers. So the ability to keep learning and improving one's knowledge and skills is of utmost importance. In the student-centered process of teaching and learning, the acquisition of knowledge is no longer only the teacher's responsibility, Learning happens through students' activity, the active construction of new knowledge, their intrinsic motivation, and the ability to keep going, thus hopefully turning into lifelong learners. The educational scientists from Tartu and Tallinn universities have come up with this illustrative model of contemporary learning paradigms, and also those scientists had long debates as to what should be here and what are more important, what categories are more important than others. And so finally they identified 5 skills as learning objectives. And the first one being subject knowledge and skills that are necessary for one to become the subject matter expert in one's field. So this is the expert knowledge that also Professor Eamets was talking about. Then there are learning skills that make it possible to keep learning, keep developing. So the underlying idea is that learning does not stop at some age or at some stage, but learning goes on even irrespective of schools being present. Then collaborative skills that promote the development of students' social skills and learning together is important in the new understanding of teaching and learning. Also self-regulation, meaning that students acquire the skills necessary to set goals for themselves and design a meaningful path towards achieving those goals. Inherently, here there's the readiness also to assume responsibility for one's actions and choices. And finally, subjective well-being that is influenced by the learning environment. So for example, whether the student perceives that learning is student-centered and meaningful, whether he perceives that the learning environment is stress-free and supportive. So without going into lengthy descriptions of the traditional or teacher-centered teaching and learning, I'm sure that you agree with me that the changes in education have been and continue being profound. So such radical changes in the understanding of teaching and learning also call for changes in teaching methods, not to mention each teacher comprehending and analyzing their own understanding of teaching and learning. Teachers' teaching style and students' learning style are directly connected with their understanding of learning. Earlier research actually suggests that the fact that teacher is teaching, it does not automatically mean that the student is learning. So it is very important to pay attention to the quality of teaching and the quality of learning. From the point of view of teaching, it is important to understand what the teacher believes in, how he or she describes their teaching philosophy. And teachers who assume the role of passing on knowledge obviously favor a teacher-centered approach, whereas teachers who see their role in supporting students' development into autonomous and self-regulating learners are inclined towards student-centered approach. Teachers' teaching philosophy is clearly connected with the quality of teaching, and that in its turn is considered to be one of the most important factors that influences students' learning. So we were driven by the need to understand the teacher's teaching philosophy, and that's the aim of our research. Our first research conducted in the chair of foreign languages was to find out what elements of contemporary learning paradigm teachers implement in their everyday teaching practice. Also, we wanted to know what factors promote or what factors inhibit implementing the elements of contemporary learning paradigm. So in the first stage of the research, a semi-structured interview was conducted with the teachers, focusing on teachers' everyday teaching practices. The questions were centered around lesson preparation, conducting classes, organizing students' independent work, since this is a major part of learning, also on assessment and feedback. And teachers then talked about what they actually do in classroom. In the second stage of the research, a questionnaire was administered, and the questionnaire contained statements of teaching practices, and teachers marked how often they resort to the given practices, and in the form of free answers, free comments, they also mentioned what promoted the use of some practice or other, or what stopped them from doing so. And so as for the results, according to the principles of contemporary learning, students' needs, expectations, and prior knowledge form the foundation of the planning of teaching and learning. And our teachers understand the importance of including students in the planning phase of the course. However, the reality is that oftentimes teachers have no idea what the students' expectations or needs are, or the level of their prior knowledge. Teachers form this understanding most often after the courses have started, and teachers and students have met, and they have actually had a chance to discuss the goals and expectations. So a solution they see here is in a more flexible planning that would allow changes into the courses after the learning needs have been mapped out and identified. And there was only one teacher who claimed that she makes a precise plan and sticks to it rigorously. As for the teaching practices, knowledge is constructed in collaboration with the teacher and the students, which means that teachers have to be aware of different ways of learning and make use of different teaching methods that make it possible for students to be active in class and participate actively. However, as educational psychologist Grete Arro pointed out in one of her lectures that I just happened to listen to a couple of weeks ago, learning happens effectively when student is mentally active and is actively constructing new knowledge in their head and establishing connections with knowledge they already possess. So our teachers vary their teaching methods and activities, yet they tend to use the methods they feel comfortable with. At times they experiment with something new, but a very busy teaching schedule doesn't really allow them to try out new methods as much as they would want to. And the same goes for using technology in classroom. There, of course, is also the experience that comes into play. When a teacher is not confident in using a digital gadget or tool or a program, then they tend not to use them. As for collaboration skills, so our students develop them through group work. They also give each other feedback. They are encouraged to express their opinions freely and be constructively critical as well. And it is also important to mention and point out collaboration of teachers and students, since we view ourselves as language experts and our students oftentimes as subject matter experts. So learning actually happens both ways. And what was very important for us was that one of the teachers pointed out that participating in this research guided her to reflect on her own teaching and made her analyze it more deeply. Since in our opinion, self-reflection is very important because it's hard to develop one's teaching when there is no clear understanding of one's teaching philosophy or teaching style, which are the foundation of teaching, in fact. And we believe that understanding one's teaching philosophy makes it also easier to understand and analyze students' learning styles that are directly connected with their understanding of what learning is. We realized that we need to take a closer look at the students' learning style and their understanding of the learning when a few years ago we started receiving students from Ukraine. They come from a completely different cultural setting with a completely different experience of learning and a completely different expectation or understanding of teaching. We knew that teachers' teaching style and students' learning style, teachers' level of control or students' readiness of self-regulation have to match for the best results. So as it's depicted in this table, the best cooperation is marked with the darkest squares here. So it shows that the teacher who is an authority in the classroom and strictly controlling the process is not going to achieve good results with students who are involved or self-regulating and ready to direct their own learning and assume responsibility for it. So the same way a teacher who is a facilitator or a consultant, ready to point the way and not control, may not be what dependent students need for their most efficient learning experience. So teaching Ukrainian students and discussing learning with them and teaching with them and guiding them through self-reflection and analyzing their feedback, we came to an understanding that Ukrainian students coming here to study are expecting a completely different, a lot more traditional approach to teaching and learning. So maybe it wasn't quite like in this cartoon, but they were clearly not ready for this type of classroom work either. They expect the process to be teacher-led and controlled, as this is what their previous learning experiences taught them. So what we heard more often than not was, you are the experts. You know best what we need to learn and how we need to learn it. So that's what they kept repeating, especially towards the beginning of the course. And that made us wonder whether there is a conflict between the way we teach and the way they expect to be taught. And mind you, it's not even the way they expect to learn, but the way they expect to be taught, because active learning wasn't even in the picture really. So we became curious as to who establishes the values in classroom when understandings of efficient teaching and learning are so different. And in order to find answers to our questions, we conducted a semi-structured group interview with 20 students from Ukraine. We wanted to find out whether constructive approach to learning and student-centeredness that characterizes our teaching are actually suitable for students who tend to think teaching must be teacher-centered and controlled and graded. And the group interview proved our initial assumption. So we were actually correct. Our students' prior learning experience has been traditional, very teacher-centered. There was a clear expectation and understanding in the group that the teachers assume responsibility for students' learning. As in the classroom, the teacher is the figure of authority. The teacher distributes knowledge, controls what students have acquired. So in our classroom setting, it caused a lot of confusion at first when, for example, homework was not checked in class, or the distinction between submitting flawless work as opposed to submitting your own work. So this was a relatively complicated concept first to grasp. Furthermore, Ukrainian students expected formal testing of knowledge. They expected grading, and also they wanted us to make grades public, thus creating competition in class, which again goes against our better understanding of efficient learning or supportive learning environment. And our language courses do not focus on preparing students for any particular tests and language exams or testing students during the course. And this is diametrically different from the expectations of Ukrainian students when they come to Estonia, and it's diametrically different from the expectations they expressed at the beginning of the course as their language learning goal. So it is a grade, it is a test result or an examination result that they want. But instead, our courses aim to promote the students' active language skills. And actually, our students pointed this out as one of the major differences compared with their previous learning experiences. However, so our courses with the Ukrainian students are 14 weeks long, so it's quite a bit of time actually. And in spite of having completely different expectations to learning, our students at the end of the course claimed that there was no conflict in values for them. It was not difficult for most of them, not all of them, but for most of them, to adjust to the new paradigm of learning. And they pointed out that the supportive learning environment that teachers created and student-centeredness helped them in getting used to the new ways of learning. Students value teachers as guides and the process that allowed for flexibility and individual approach. Also, our way of assessing assessment in the form of individual formative feedback provided them with information about their learning and also made it possible for them to understand and develop their learning strategies. So actually, this relative ease of getting used to a completely new setting for learning for our students actually created another dilemma for us. After the course was over, it actually got us thinking what kind of learning environment they would be going back to and what it would do to their understanding of learning. But so you see, there was even an ethical dilemma for us here. But this is a completely different issue, and so I'll leave it with that. But we did think about it. According to contemporary learning paradigm, the role of the teacher is to point out different ways for learning and also help students develop their learning skills. At first, it was alien for our Ukrainian students to reflect upon their own learning and to understand how they learn and to analyze it. Again, they were expecting the teachers to say what to learn, how to learn, and what the best ways of learning are for all of them. You are the experts, you know best, right? Was what they kept repeating. However, in the course of learning, students got accustomed to reflecting, and their self-reflection actually became deeper and more substantial. And the students also pointed out that in the course of learning, and I quote, smaller pieces help us construct bigger pieces of knowledge, which is what constructive learning is about, isn't it? So in conclusion, we agree that effective teaching depends above all on our understanding of teaching. Understanding one's philosophies of teaching and learning may not, however, be easy. It calls for constant reflection upon one's practices. At the same time, we are convinced that critical analysis of one's teaching practices is the foundation of efficient learning and teaching, and also the value system in classroom. Also, our Ukrainian students, as a word of farewell, urged us to continue with our student-centered approach, irrespective of students' prior learning experiences and expectations they have formed. They actually assured us that students get accustomed to the approach to learning promoted by teachers. So we became convinced that teachers establish values in a classroom, and supported by positive learning experience, students are ready to assume the values and make them their own. But this also shows how important it is to shape teacher identity, to make sure that teaching philosophies are up to date. And last but not least, and maybe this is one of the most important understandings that I take away from here, is that it is very important to support teacher professional development. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, then I'm sure Aigi and I will be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting. On the comments, at the moment there are no questions, but I just thought that, what's your experience? How willing are teachers to hand over the control in the classroom? You were speaking about Ukrainian students, but are our Estonian teachers really ready to implement the new principles of contemporary learning paradigm?
It's a good question, in fact. I represent English teachers here, and throughout my whole career, everything I know about teaching has been shaped by active teaching, active learning, active methods. So in a way, we only had to sort of add new components, make our vision broader in a way. You throw in feedback, and then you throw in formative assessment, and then you throw in self-reflection. But we didn't really have to turn our teaching upside down and start doing things completely in a new way. So with subjects that are maybe more traditional, it could be actually difficult. So I believe it is still a question of understanding who you are as a teacher, what you value as a teacher, why you do these things, and then how you do it. So for me, why and how are the fundamental questions in education, actually. Why I do it, and then how's the best way of doing it. So I need to answer these questions, and I think every teacher needs to answer these questions. But yeah, how easy it is. I don't actually think that self-analysis is very easy. It is a skill we all need to learn and improve.
I was wondering, this is Nelia talking. I was wondering if you could give more, describe more the profile of the students. Like, I was wondering, was it the age matters, or the rank matters, or the previous learning skills, experience matters, whether they were a separate group or they were put within the group of Estonian students.
Mm-hmm. Our Ukrainian students study with a few Estonians. So they form a group of 10 Ukrainians and 2, 3, 4 Estonians in one group. They are all adults, and the most of them have prior especially Ukrainians, actually have also university education. So people have, degrees when they come to us or when they start their service. I don't think that the way they understand teaching and learning has anything to do with rank or age, actually, because, also those people vary in age, yet their understanding is relatively uniform. It doesn't really matter whether you're 27 and have a university degree or you are 40 and maybe also have a university degree. So your prior experience seems to be the same. You come from this relatively traditional educational background.